An 8.8 is the equivalent of basically detonating 1 trillion pounds or 1 trillion kilograms of TNT.
Most of the buildings remained standing, but the facade of a kindergarten collapsed, but no one died or was injured.
You're really compressing all that energy into a much narrower, smaller depth of the water. And that really bottles it all up, and that's when you get a wave to actually manifest and you push that water ashore.
The warnings were for all over Japan, so I was frankly scared.
We've got water, we got some snacks, so we're going to stay elevated. This is our first tsunami warning ever, so this is all new to us.
Very warm welcome to the day. Now, millions of people have been evacuating from coastal regions along the Pacific after one of the strongest earthquakes ever recorded. The 8.8 magnitude quake hit off the Kamchatka Peninsula, a sparsely populated part of Russia's far east, triggering a tsunami which soon struck Russia's Kuril Islands and Japan's northern island of Hokkaido. In other areas, people have been rushing to higher ground after tsunami warnings were issued. Let's take a look at some numbers. According to the National Centers for Environmental Information in the U.S., this is approximately how long it takes a tsunami to reach different parts of the Pacific.
From a quake to crashing waves. A magnitude 8.8 earthquake struck off the coast of Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula, one of the strongest ever recorded. Russian authorities said its power sent waves of 6 meters surging ashore. It also damaged buildings and the power grid on a nearby island.
At kindergarten number 15, the building facade collapsed, but thank God there was no one injured. There were no children, but there is damage.
The earthquake's effects have been felt around the world. In Japan, almost 2 million people evacuated to high buildings or higher ground. Waves of around 60 centimetres were measured from Hokkaido in the north down to Tokyo Bay, according to Japan's meteorological agency. Even though the initial waves were not destructive, alerts remained in place for several hours.
I grabbed only what I could and walked here with others. I feel safer here as there are other people.
In Hawaii, roads turned to gridlock as warnings of waves of up to 3 meters were issued by authorities.
So far, we have not seen a wave of consequence, which is a great relief to us. It's kind of a blessing to not be reporting any damage.
Meteorologist Matthew Capucci told us more about the tsunami and the massive 8.8 magnitude quake that caused it.
Now, to give folks some perspective, an 8.8 is the equivalent of basically detonating 1 trillion pounds or 1 trillion kilograms of TNT. It's an enormous blast, an enormous amount of force that is released. And of course, that force comes from the Earth's crust, essentially fracturing and sliding against one another. This occurred in the Pacific Ring of Fire. It's on the periphery of the Pacific tectonic plate. And what's happening is that plate is moving northwest at about, we'll say, 77 millimeters, so roughly 3 inches every year. And it's colliding with and subducting or kind of going underneath a different plate called the Okhotsk plate. Now, that collision, that sort of convergence of the plates adds an enormous amount of stress and tension that is suddenly released every so often in these mega thrust earthquakes as the Pacific plate, which is dense and being crushed by the weight of the water above it, slides violently underneath the Okhotsk plate. That occurs in something called the Kuril Kamchatka Trench, and that releases exceptional energy in these megathrust quakes. Now, the issue with the thrust quake, you have an up and down movement of the seafloor. In some earthquakes, you have a side-to-side shake. We call that strike slip. But this was an up and down thrust quake. And for that reason, we displaced water. We essentially shook the seafloor and caused a potentially significant tsunami. But the interesting thing, if you're in the open ocean on, say, a cruise ship, you wouldn't notice a thing as a tsunami passes beneath you. Because the tsunami, think of it as a wave of just energy. That energy is propagating through the ocean. And when you have an ocean that's 3-4 plus kilometers deep, as much of the Pacific is, that energy has a lot of sort of room to be dispersed vertically. But once you start getting towards the coast and the bathymetry or the shape of the seafloor starts to slope upwards to meet both the continental shelf and, more importantly, the beaches, you're really compressing all that energy into a much narrower, smaller depth of the water. And that really bottles it all up. And that's when you get a wave to actually manifest and you push that water ashore. And that's why tsunamis are really tough to ascertain the magnitude of until they reach the coastline.
Let's get across to Lima, Peru, where we have journalist Martin Rippel standing by for us. Martin, first of all, just tell us what has happened in Peru so far.
Hello, Claire. It's nice to be with your audience. Well, since this morning, Peruvians, especially those living along the coast, have been receiving cell phone alerts through our early warning system, advising people to stay away from beaches and other vulnerable coastal areas. Authorities have closed around 125 ports nationwide while the threat remains. However, the alert is gradually being lifted. About 20 minutes ago, it was reported that activities were returning to normality at the Callao port, the main port of our country. Earlier this morning, authorities published a schedule indicating when the tsunami was expected to hit various coastal regions. According to that timeline, the wave should have been reached Lima around 2 p.m., but right now it's like 20 past 3 and nothing has happened. That said, there were reports from some areas that the sea withdraw its waters by several dozen meters from its usual tide line, although no damage has been reported so far.
Okay, well, that sounds like good news for the moment, at least. Peru, of course, sits directly on this so-called Pacific Ring of Fire, which is an area that sees a lot of volcanic and seismic activity. So a place that knows a thing or two about this. What preparations would you typically have in place in Peru, in the event of a possible tsunami?
Yeah, indeed. Tremors and earthquakes activity happen regularly in Peru. It lies squarely on the Ring of Fire, which is responsible for the 10 most powerful earthquakes ever recorded in modern history. But while people are aware of the risk, public confidence in Peru, in how prepared we are, is still shaky. After receiving this morning's tsunami alert, the public's immediate reaction was, okay, but what should we actually do now? Many areas along Peru's 3,000 kilometers Pacific coastline are highly vulnerable. They have poor infrastructure and informal housing, too close to the tide line. In Lima, where 1/3 of the country's population lives, coastal roads are often congested and evacuations options are limited. So I would say that we know the risk, but we are not prepared as we should be.
Martin, thank you so much for your insights today. We've been speaking with journalist Martin Rippel in Lima.
Thank you very much.